The thought came to Emily before she could stop it. This shouldn't have been done, and yet she was already sitting across from Daniel, already caught in the quiet tension that filled the small Boston cafe as rain tapped against the window and evening lights blurred the streets outside. She had come here thinking it would be simple, just coffee, just catching up, just a familiar face in a familiar city, but the moment she saw him waiting, something shifted. Daniel looked the same and different at once, older than she remembered, calmer, carrying a seriousness that made her heart beat faster for reasons she didn't want to name. He smiled when he saw her, warm and careful, and that smile alone brought back years of memories, family dinners, shared jokes, moments when their paths crossed but never touched. Emily told herself to relax, to treat this like any other meeting, yet her hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around her mug. They spoke quickly, words flowing easily, about work stress, about how fast time had passed, about people they both knew, but beneath the surface there was a pull neither could ignore. Daniel watched her closely, not in a way that felt uncomfortable, but in a way that made her feel seen, truly seen, and that was what unsettled her most. She realized he wasn't just listening, he was noticing everything, the pauses in her speech, the way she avoided certain topics, the way her smile faded when she mentioned feeling stuck in her life. The cafe noise faded into the background as their conversation deepened without effort, moving faster than she expected, like a river after heavy rain. Emily felt a strange mix of comfort and danger, as if she were standing too close to the edge of something important. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was lower, steadier, and he said there were things he had wanted to say for a long time but never found the right moment. Her heart tightened instantly. She knew what he meant before he explained, and that knowledge made her breath shallow. She should have interrupted him. She should have changed the subject or made a joke or checked her phone, but she didn't. She stayed still, trapped by her own curiosity and the honesty in his eyes. Daniel admitted that this meeting wasn't accidental, that he had thought about it for days, knowing it might change everything, and as he spoke, Emily realized how carefully he chose his words, how much effort it took for him to remain respectful and calm while clearly standing at the edge of something emotional. He wasn't dramatic, wasn't reckless, he was simply honest, and that made it harder to pull away. Emily remembered all the reasons this was a bad idea, how close their lives were connected, how many people stood between them, how easy it would be for one wrong step to hurt someone deeply. Those thoughts rushed through her mind fast, sharp, and clear, yet none of them stopped her from listening. Daniel finally said he believed they had been avoiding a truth that had existed for years, quietly, patiently, waiting for the wrong moment to appear. The silence that followed felt louder than any sound in the cafe. Emily stared at her coffee, watching the steam rise, buying time she didn't have. She felt the weight of the moment pressing on her chest, felt the past and future pulling at her from opposite sides. This was the point where she was supposed to stand up and leave, where she was supposed to protect everyone involved, including herself. But something inside her was tired of pretending, tired of being careful all the time. She looked up and met Daniel's eyes, and in that instant she knew she had already gone too far. She didn't say yes, didn't say no, didn't say anything at all. She simply didn't walk away. That quiet choice, that single pause, changed the direction of everything. Outside, the rain slowed, the city kept moving, people walked by unaware that inside a small cafe, two lives had shifted off their safe paths. Emily felt it then, deep and clear, this shouldn't have been done, but the moment had already passed, and there was no way to rewind it. After that evening, nothing returned to normal, and Emily felt at the moment she woke the next morning, her mind already racing with thoughts of Daniel before her feet even touched the floor. Days moved faster, filled with messages that arrived early and stayed late, words that were careful but warm, thoughtful but honest, as if both of them were testing how far they could go without saying too much. Emily tried to slow things down, telling herself this was temporary, that feelings could fade if ignored, but every message pulled her deeper, reminding her how easy it felt to talk to him, how natural it was to share parts of herself she rarely showed anyone. Daniel never rushed her, never demanded answers, and that quiet patience made her feel safe and restless at the same time. They spoke about fears, about regrets, about the lives they imagined but never fully lived, and each conversation made the space between them feel smaller even though they weren't together. Emily caught herself smiling at her phone, then quickly locking it, guilt rising like a shadow behind every happy moment. She knew she was stepping into something dangerous, something that could change relationships she valued, yet her heart refused to listen to reason. When they finally met again, it wasn't planned far ahead, it happened suddenly, as if both of them knew delaying would only make it harder. They walked along the river as the sun dipped low, the air cool and calm, and the steady sound of water matched the steady tension between them. Daniel spoke openly, telling her he had tried to bury these feelings for years, believing silence was the safest choice, but time had only made them stronger. Emily listened, torn between wanting him to stop and wanting him to keep going. She admitted she felt the same pull, even though it scared her, even though she knew the risks better than anyone. The honesty between them felt heavy but freeing, like finally setting down a weight they had both carried alone. Daniel stopped walking and turned to her, his face serious, his voice firm but gentle, and told her that if they continued, it had to mean something, that pretending this was harmless would only cause more pain later. Emily felt tears burn her eyes as reality closed in around her. This was no longer a quiet feeling hidden in words, it was a choice demanding an answer. She thought about loyalty, about trust, about the damage that could follow, and for a brief moment she almost stepped back, almost said it had to end there. But then she thought about how empty her life had felt before this, how many times she had ignored her own heart for the sake of peace, and something inside her broke. She nodded slowly, not in excitement but in acceptance, knowing this decision would reshape everything. Daniel didn't celebrate, didn't smile in relief. Instead, he exhaled deeply, as if understanding the weight of what they had just done. They stood there in silence, the city glowing behind them, aware that they had crossed a line without touching, without promises, simply by choosing truth over comfort. As they parted that night, Emily felt both lighter and heavier, knowing she had stepped forward into something real and uncertain. She walked home alone, replaying every word, every look, realizing that this path had no easy ending, only consequences waiting to unfold. She whispered to herself that this shouldn't have happened, yet even as the thought formed, she knew it was already too late to turn back. Being together felt unreal at first, like living inside a quiet secret that followed Emily and Daniel everywhere, shaping their days and nights without ever showing itself fully in public. They didn't rush into anything careless. Instead, they moved with caution, meeting in calm places, talking more than touching, trying to understand what this new reality meant for both of them. Emily often felt joy mixed with fear, happiness chased by guilt, as if every good moment carried a price she would soon have to pay. Daniel tried to be steady, supportive, reminding her that they had chosen honesty, but even he struggled when the weight of their choice pressed down on him. They shared long talks about the future, about what they hoped for and what they feared losing, and sometimes those conversations ended in silence, both of them realizing how much stood between love and peace. Emily noticed how careful Daniel became around family gatherings, how his voice softened when certain names came up, and it reminded her that their happiness lived in fragile balance. At night, when she was alone, doubts returned stronger, replaying every warning she had ignored, every rule she had quietly broken. She wondered if love was supposed to feel this heavy, this complicated, or if they had already gone too far to ask that question. Daniel, too, carried his own guilt, often pulling back without explanation, afraid that his happiness was built on someone else's pain. Those moments hurt Emily deeply, not because she doubted his feelings, but because she understood them too well. When the truth finally surfaced, it didn't arrive with anger or loud words, it came slowly, through honest conversation and trembling voices, and the silence afterward felt endless. Emily watched the pain in her best friend's eyes, a pain that wasn't loud but deep, and she felt her heart break in a way she hadn't expected. There was no shouting, no harsh blame, only quiet disappointment that felt harder to face. Apologies sounded small in that moment, unable to fix what had already changed. Emily realized then that love does not erase responsibility, and choosing her own heart had meant hurting another. Daniel stood beside her, saying little, knowing words couldn't heal this kind of wound. Days passed with distance and tension, relationships shifting into unfamiliar shapes, some growing cold, others holding on by thin threads. Emily tried to stay strong, reminding herself that she had acted with honesty, yet doubt followed her everywhere, questioning whether honesty was enough. Daniel reassured her, but even he couldn't promise things would ever feel simple again. Their love survived, but it was no longer light or easy. It was shaped by consequences, by awareness, by the knowledge that some doors had closed forever. Emily understood then that being together meant accepting loss alongside love, and that realization changed her forever. She looked at Daniel one evening, seeing both comfort and regret in his eyes, and knew that while they had chosen each other, the cost of that choice would always be part of their story. Time moved forward whether Emily was ready or not, and months passed with a quiet strength she did not know she had, each day teaching her how to live with choices that could not be undone. Life settled into a new rhythm, not peaceful but steady, where familiar faces felt distant and some conversations never returned to what they once were. Emily learned that healing did not mean forgetting. It meant accepting the shape life had taken and finding a way to breathe inside it. She and Daniel remained together, but their love was no longer built on excitement alone. It was built on patience, understanding, and shared responsibility. They talked openly about their mistakes, about the pain left behind, and about the future they now had to shape carefully. Daniel became quieter in some ways, more thoughtful, carrying the weight of knowing that love can bring loss as easily as comfort. Emily saw this change in him and felt both gratitude and sadness, realizing that growing together sometimes meant growing heavier. There were days when regret visited her without warning, triggered by old photos, familiar streets, or memories of laughter that once felt simple and free. On those days, she wondered how life might have turned out if she had walked away that first evening, if silence had been easier than truth. Yet even then, she knew she could not lie to herself. Loving Daniel had been real, deep, and honest, even if the timing had been wrong. Slowly, some wounds softened, not healed but less sharp, and boundaries were rebuilt with care and respect. Emily learned that forgiveness, both given and received, takes time and humility, and that not every relationship returns to what it once was. One quiet night, she sat alone by the window, city lights stretching into the distance, holding her phone as she reread an old message from a time before everything changed. The words felt distant, belonging to another version of herself, someone who had not yet faced difficult choices. She closed her eyes and let the memory pass, understanding that looking back could not change what was done. When Daniel joined her, he did not speak right away. He simply sat beside her, his presence calm and familiar, and in that silence, Emily felt the truth of where they stood. They had chosen each other knowing the cost, and while the price had been high, it was one they were still willing to pay. There was no perfect ending waiting for them, no clear moment where everything felt right again, only the quiet promise of moving forward with honesty. Emily rested her head against Daniel's shoulder, feeling both peace and responsibility settle into her chest. She no longer whispered that this should not have been done. Instead, she accepted that it had been done, and that life was not about undoing the past but living wisely with it. The future remained uncertain, shaped by effort rather than hope alone, but they faced it together, changed, aware, and real. Some stories are not meant to be simple or clean. They exist in the space between right and wrong, love and loss, regret and acceptance. Emily understood that now. What was done could not be erased, but it could be carried with care, and in that understanding, she found the quiet strength to continue.